What if Clint Eastwood's dog found the love of his life, half dead and buried in the desert, and she was promised to him by fate? This isn't just a Western. It's a gun-smoked love story with bullets, betrayal, and a woman who crawled out of death to rewrite destiny. Clint Eastwood didn't ride for pleasure. He rode because the land required it. Hard land, lonely land, the kind of land that swallowed weak men and buried secrets in dust. His ranch sat 40 miles outside the nearest half-dead town, a fading remnant of a once golden West where bullets used to solve disputes and promises were made with spit and handshakes. Now it was just him, the wind, the creak of fence posts, and his dog, an ugly, clever mutt named Jasper who'd followed him home years ago after a saloon brawl left Clint with 2 broken ribs and a reputation for not dying easy. That morning, the sky was gray with heat, a blistering sun rising behind a curtain of wind-blown grit. Clint was mending a broken rail when Jasper started acting strange, pacing in circles, ears perked, nose twitching toward the ridge. At first, Clint thought the dog had caught scent of a rabbit or snake, but Jasper didn't bolt off like he usually did. Instead, he sat suddenly, stared across the expanse like a statue, then let out a low, whimpering growl. Clint squinted into the light and saw nothing. Still, experience had taught him never to doubt animals or instinct. He packed up his tools, mounted his horse, an aging roan named Whiskey, and rode toward the ridge, rifle across his saddle horn. Jasper led, weaving through mesquite and sun-scorched rocks, tail stiff and body tense. About a mile out, the wind shifted and Clint smelled something he hadn't expected: blood. Not the clean scent of fresh kill. This was sour, mingled with sweat and heat and fear. Jasper took off with a bark, yelping madly, claws kicking up dust, and Clint kicked Whiskey into a trot to keep up. They found her in a dry wash choked with tumbleweed and shadow. She was lying half on her side, half on her back, one arm stretched out like she'd been reaching for something before giving up. Her dress was torn, the kind of blue that once meant something but now looked closer to gray. Her skin was scorched red where the sun had kissed too long. Dried blood matted her hair and ran down one temple. Her lips were cracked, her ankles swollen. She didn't move. Clint thought she was dead. Jasper whimpered and circled her, then pressed his snout to her cheek and gave the faintest whine. Clint dismounted and knelt beside her, careful not to touch too roughly. Up close, he saw she was young. Not a child, but not yet worn down by time. Her face, though caked with dust, held sharp features softened by exhaustion. And then a twitch, barely perceptible, but real. Her chest moved. Still breathing, he muttered, "Goddamn. No ID. No bag. Just a strip of fabric tied around one wrist. Embroidered, maybe. Fancy once." Clint didn't waste time wondering. The sun was too high, and out here exposure killed faster than bullets. He gently lifted her, she was light as a ghost, and placed her across his saddle. Jasper kept pace as they rode back, head swiveling like he expected someone, or something, to appear on the horizon and claim her. Back at the ranch, Clint moved fast but steady. He laid her on the guest bed, a room that hadn't seen company in over a decade, and drew the curtains to kill the light. He fetched a bowl of cool water, rags, and a bottle of whiskey, and started cleaning the wounds as best he could. She had a gash on her scalp, bruises on her ribs, scrapes all along her knees, and a bite mark, human, on her shoulder. That one stopped him. Whoever she was running from, Clint knew now they hadn't just wanted to rob her. She didn't wake that night. Clint sat beside the bed, sharpening his knife out of habit more than need, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks in the windows. Jasper didn't leave her side, curled near the edge of the bed like a sentry made of fur and bone. The dog had never acted like this with anyone before, and Clint had to admit, it rattled him a little. When the lamp burned low, Clint went outside to smoke. He stood under the stars, watching for movement across the ridges. Coyotes cried far off, and the night pulsed with its usual uneasy silence. Still, Clint felt something had shifted, like the world had blinked and now things were a shade darker. The next day, She stirred. Not much. Just a flicker of fingers, a furrow in her brow. Clint sat up from his slouch position in the corner and moved closer, watching her mouth twitch around dry words. He gave her a few drops of water. Her lips moved again. Clara, she breathed, or maybe Carla. Then run. Her eyes fluttered, closed again. Clint wrote the words in a small notebook he kept in his back pocket. A habit from the old days, scouting missions, cattle deals, debts owed. Now it served as a ledger of survival. He made her soup from dried beans and salted pork and tried coaxing a few spoonfuls into her mouth. She gagged on the first try, but managed to swallow some eventually. He checked the perimeter of the ranch twice that day. Replaced the buckshot in the 12-gauge. Set tripwires in the outer path. Not to maim, just to warn. He didn't know who this woman was or what storm followed her, but Clint had a rule. If someone's dying on your land, they deserve your protection. Doesn't matter who they are. Doesn't matter what they've done. By the second evening, she could open her eyes without flinching. They were gray, clear, and strange, not just from pain but recognition. Clint wasn't sure what she saw when she looked at him, but it made her tremble. "You okay?" he asked, voice soft for the first time in a while. She tried to speak, failed, nodded. "I ain't gonna hurt you." She nodded again, whispered, thirsty. He helped her sit up slowly, gave her a canteen. She drank like she hadn't tasted water in weeks. And she passed out. That night, Clint couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch with Jasper, nursing a bottle of whiskey and staring at the hills, listening for movement. The wind had changed. Something was coming. Maybe it was law. Maybe it was blood. Maybe it was something worse, something tied to fate, buried deep. He thought back to her face. Something about it gnawed at the edges of memory. He'd known women, but this one had an echo in her eyes. He couldn't place it, but it felt old, familiar, dangerous. Inside, the woman, still unnamed, shivered in her fevered sleep. Jasper growled low again, just once. And Clint Eastwood, a man not known for second chances or soft hearts, felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in 20 years. Recognition, even if he didn't understand why yet. The woman didn't speak for 2 days. She drifted in and out of fevered dreams, sometimes crying out in a voice that cracked like dried bark, other times murmuring apologies to no one. Clint kept her alive with spoonfuls of broth and water, wiping sweat from her brow with an old cloth, each touch a hesitant reach through a fog of memory. He was no doctor, never had been, but life in the West didn't afford the luxury of helplessness. Still, there was something else driving him, something beneath the surface of duty, something rooted in a half-remembered promise made under stars long forgotten. He couldn't explain it, not to himself, not even in the quiet conversations he sometimes had with Jasper. The dog remained vigilant, always at the woman's side, occasionally raising his head and staring at Clint with eyes too knowing for a mutt. On the third morning, when the sky was pale and dusty with dawn, she opened her eyes. They were storm gray, wide and wary, and locked onto Clint's like she'd just returned from somewhere far worse than the desert. She tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse gasp. He gave her water and waited. When her voice finally came, it was sandpaper and silk. "Where am I?" she asked, her eyes darting to the window, then to the gun belt hanging by the door. Clint answered simply, "Safe." She flinched at the word, like it was something she no longer believed in. "Name's Clint," he added after a beat. "This here's my ranch. Found you out near Coyote Ridge. You were half dead." Her eyes closed, and her lip trembled. "Felt like it," she whispered. Over the next few days, she regained her strength in fragments, though the bruises faded slower than the fear in her voice. Clint didn't press her. He'd seen what pushing could do to a person with wounds deeper than flesh. Instead, he fixed the porch swing, chopped wood, and brought her tea brewed with desert herbs, calming stuff an old Apache friend once taught him to use. Eventually, she told him her name was Marla. No last name, not at first, just Marla. Clint accepted it, though it didn't sit right with him, like a single piece of a broken puzzle offered without the rest of the picture. Marla spent hours staring out at the horizon like she was waiting for something to find her. When Clint asked if someone was looking for her, she said, "Yes," and nothing more. There were nights she'd wake screaming, drenched in sweat, clawing at the sheets. Clint would burst into the room, shotgun in hand, and find her gasping, whispering words he couldn't make out, words not meant for this world. Afterward, she'd sit on the porch in silence while the desert wind cooled her skin. One night, she finally spoke. "He's coming," she said. "The man who did this to me. He don't forget, and he don't forgive." Her voice cracked on the word he, and Clint knew it wasn't just fear in her, it was certainty. A shadow had followed her, and was gaining ground. Clint said nothing, but that night, he cleaned every rifle he owned, loaded each one, polished the barrel of his old Colt. He wasn't a stranger to ghosts, and if one had taken human shape, he'd be ready. Then came the letter. It arrived by horse courier. Unusual, considering Clint hadn't had contact with town in months. The rider didn't stay, just handed off the envelope, tipped his hat, and left in a cloud of dust. Clint opened it under the shade of his porch. The handwriting was elegant and exact, almost theatrical. No name signed, just words that made his blood freeze. "You took what's mine. She was promised. You'll return her, or I'll take her back in pieces." Clint didn't show Marla the letter, but she must have seen something shift in his eyes. That night, she finally told him everything. Her real name was Marla Caraway, daughter of a railroad baron and heiress to one of the biggest land grants west of the Mississippi. But she hadn't lived like royalty. Her father had traded her like property to secure a deal with a man named Gideon Strathmore, a powerful rancher-turned-outlaw known for disappearing enemies and collecting brides like horses. "I was 17, she said, her voice hollow. "He was near 40, and I was his prize." Her father signed a contract. Not just legal papers, but a blood pact, sealed in some twisted ritual Gideon believed bound her soul to his. "I ran before the wedding," she continued. "Been running since." She looked Clint in the eye. "He doesn't let go. You don't understand. He doesn't die. Not like other men." Clint didn't believe in curses or hexes, but something about her voice, the weight of truth in it, settled into his bones. He'd heard of Gideon Strathmore. Everyone west of Tucson had. There were stories of him surviving gunshots to the heart, men vanishing after trying to testify against him, women gone missing from towns after his riders passed through. Clint had thought them tall tales, the kind old drunks told by firelight. Now he wasn't so sure. Marla touched Clint's arm. "There's more," she said. "Before I ran, before my father made the deal, I was betrothed to someone else." Clint blinked. She stood and walked to the old dresser in the corner, opening a drawer Clint hadn't touched in years. From it, she pulled a medallion, worn, silver, etched with a stallion and sunburst, something Clint hadn't seen since boyhood. She placed it in his hand. "I gave you this," he whispered, heart stalling. "You were 12, she said, tears in her eyes. "I was 10. Our parents arranged it. But when your family left Arizona, everything changed. My father pretended you didn't exist. Then Gideon came." Clint looked at her, really looked at her, past the bruises, past the pain, and saw the girl with pigtails and fire in her voice, the one who'd raced him on ponies and dared him to kiss her by the creek. "I didn't recognize you," he said, his voice breaking. "Until now." "You weren't supposed to," she replied. "That was the point." The wind howled through the valley like it carried the spirits of everything unsaid. Clint stood there, the medallion heavy in his palm, the truth even heavier in his chest. Fate had a way of circling back, and this time it had teeth. He realized then, the woman his dog had found dying in the dust wasn't just a stranger or a victim. She was the girl he'd once loved, the woman he'd been promised, the bride fate had stolen and returned broken. Outside, Jasper growled low, staring toward the ridge. Dust curled on the horizon like smoke from an unseen fire. Gideon was coming. The day Gideon Strathmore arrived, the wind died. It was like the desert held its breath. No bird calls, no coyote cries. Even Jasper stopped barking. Just a stillness, so complete it felt like the land itself had gone quiet to watch what came next. Clint Eastwood stood on his porch with a rifle in his hands and a medallion in his shirt pocket. A tiny, silver promise from a childhood so far gone it felt like a lie. Inside, Marla paced the floor with her jaw clenched, fists balled at her sides, eyes full of fire that had burned through too much fear to leave room for any more. She wasn't the broken thing he'd found in the dust. Not anymore. She was something harder now, something sharp. They'd spent the last 2 nights preparing. Clint had boarded up windows, laid out traps on the ridge trail, buried spare ammunition in spots he could reach even blind. Marla had helped, steady hands, and fast thinking. She wasn't just hiding anymore, she was waiting. Gideon had taken her past. She wasn't about to give him her future. He came at dusk. For riders, black coats, wide-brimmed hats, all mounted on horses darker than sin. They didn't rush. They didn't shout. They moved with the calm, deliberate rhythm of men who believed nothing in this world could stop them. At their center rode Gideon Strathmore. He looked more myth than man, tall in the saddle, eyes like flint, face weathered but untouched by time in a way that defied logic. His beard was white now, trimmed neat, and his coat gleamed like oiled leather. But it was his expression that struck hardest, not anger, not hate, just cold certainty. The face of a man convinced the world belonged to him. Clint raised his rifle and rested it across the porch rail. He didn't aim. Not yet. Let the bastard speak first. The riders stopped 20 yards out. Dust swirled at their boots. Gideon dismounted without a word, hands loose at his sides, unarmed, at least visibly. His eyes found Clint's and held them. "You got something of mine," he said, voice low and smooth, like whiskey laced with arsenic. "She's not yours," Clint replied. "Wasn't then. Ain't now." Gideon smiled thinly. "Don't matter what you believe. We made a pact, sealed with blood and breath. I've waited long enough." Inside the house, Clint heard the click of shotgun. Marla, just behind the door. He didn't turn. He just stepped down from the porch. "I reckon she made her own choice," Clint said. "You try talking her back, you'll be riding home alone. If you make it at all." Gideon's smile vanished. "This ain't about choice. It's about fate. She was promised. So was she," Clint shot back. "To me. Long before you came crawling out of hell." Gideon tilted his head slightly. "You think a childhood oath means anything? That little trinket she gave you? That was a game. This is blood. I've shed plenty for less. Then you best be ready to spill more." The wind picked up again, sudden, harsh, like the land had finally decided it wanted to howl. And then it began. One of the riders drew first. Clint dropped him with a clean shot to the chest. No hesitation. The second one ducked behind a boulder and fired wild. A window behind Clint shattered. Jasper bolted from the house like a bullet, teeth bared, leaping onto the third rider and tearing him from his horse. The man screamed. Then nothing. Gideon didn't move. He just watched. Clint spun and fired again. The man behind the boulder slumped. That left Gideon. Behind Clint, the front door swung open. Marla stepped out, shotgun braced against her hip. Her eyes never left Gideon. "I'm not yours," she said. "You never owned me. You wore my mark," Gideon said, his voice like thunder. "You ran from destiny. But destiny doesn't forget. Neither do I." Marla fired. The blast hit Gideon in the chest, knocked him off his feet. Dust rose around him. For a moment, silence. Then, impossibly, Gideon sat up. Blood soaked his shirt, but his eyes were wide, furious, alive. Clint moved fast. He crossed the yard in 5 strides, raised his rifle, and pointed it straight at Gideon's heart. "You should have stayed dead," he muttered, and pulled the trigger. This time, Gideon stayed down. His body jerked once, then went still, arms sprawled across the earth like a broken altar. Clint stared for a long second, waiting for some trick, a twitch, a gasp. But the old devil was done. Marla lowered her shotgun. Her hand shook. "Is it over?" she asked. Clint looked at her, his face lined with dust and sweat. "If it ain't," he said, "then God help the next fool who comes trying." Together, they buried Gideon at the edge of the property. Not out of respect, but because Clint didn't trust leaving him unburied. Like if they left him in the open, the bastard might claw his way back up through sheer hate. They didn't mark the grave. Jasper stood nearby the whole time, watching. Afterward, Clint and Marla sat on the porch. The sun dipped low, staining the sky red and gold. "I didn't think I'd live through this," she said. "You did more than live," Clint replied. "You ended it." She turned to look at him. "Do you believe in fate?" Clint shrugged. I believe in choices. Fate's just what folks call it, after the fact. She smiled faintly. I remember you now. That summer in Tombstone. The creek. You kissed me on a dare. He chuckled. You hit me right after. I was mad you waited so long. Clint looked out across the land. Wide, harsh, and endless. We were kids. World got in the way. It always does. But not this time. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the medallion. The same one he thought he'd lost years ago. I never let it go, she said. Even when I wanted to. Clint took it from her, closed his hand around it. Then maybe some promises are stronger than blood. Behind them, the wind stirred the dust where Gideon had fallen. The desert swallowed everything. The screams, the bodies, the past. It always did. But for once, Clint Eastwood had pulled someone out of the dust instead of burying them in it. And maybe, just maybe, the West still had room for one more story that didn't end in death.